So greetings, hello. This is part 2 of our Mary Magdalene Studies Day, and thank you very much for coming and listening, and for all of those people on the internet who can't be here today. It's very sad. A number of people were due to come for all kinds of complicated reasons. The journeys got curtailed, and so thank God to modern technology we can share this more widely. Because I know lots of people around the world are interested in Mary Magdalene, and any kind of studies that help shed light on not just her life and work, but the bigger picture, the Christ story, the church, what's happened to it, and so on. Okay, so now we're looking at the second part. In the first half, we talked about the many Marys of Magdala, and it was, complicated. There are so many. And we even thought up a new one over lunchtime, discussing the Mary of literature. Again, many novels and fictional pieces and legends and stories. Mary Magdala is a fictional character as well, and now in movies. So there's another one to add. So now I want to, in the second part, I'm talking about the implications for today. So what? I, as a teacher for many years, I'd often give very complicated talks about theology to bright kids, and they'd all say after a little while, I'd say, well, so what? We don't care. Well, so what? That's all the past. And trying to teach history as well is very complicated, because you often get that response, so what? That's all the past. Okay, well, what I'm going to argue is that this does have implications for today, and it's quite important, and that's why I bother with Mary Magdalene Studies, along with other people around the planet. Okay, so why is it important? Well, the first reason I think it's important is because in the ancient Egyptian tradition, Osiris, who was the husband of Isis, eventually was dismembered into many pieces, and his body was scattered by the force of evil and ignorance, which was personified by Seth, who, out of jealousy, fraternal jealousy, hatred, rivalry, which is a pretty common psychological problem for human beings. We can't cope with generosity. We do jealousy, which leads to war and conflict. I've just been studying the conflict between Steve Bannon and Donald Trump. Trump fired Bannon because he was jealous of him. That goes on all the time in politics. So it was a jealousy between Seth and Osiris, which led to Seth actually eventually realizing the only way he could defeat this god was to literally cut him into pieces. And then he scattered the pieces all around Egypt. Now this is a symbolic dismemberment. I think with Mary Magdalene we have a female equivalent. I want to suggest to people that, in a sense, with Mary Magdalene, she is the dismembered female, and the many Marys are scattered, and they don't communicate to each other. The sceptical Marys who say, no, there's no such thing as Mary Magdalene, they won't even talk to the theological ones who can explain it all from biblical sources. The Islamic ones who have a kind of a view of Mary Magdalene, they're not yet talking to the Christian ones or the Jewish ones. There's all separate conversations going on, which to me is like metaphorically a dismemberment of Mary. She's scattered into many pieces. And that is the human condition for many women. Many women in today's society are, marginalised, without power, without status, without equality. If you look at this from a planetary level, and if Mary Magdalene means anything, surely it's about that empowerment of the nobility of woman, her right to her materiality and her spirituality. Because the Mary Magdalene story is spirit does descend and come into incarnation, and is borne witness to. So the dismemberment is set right by that incarnational experience, which then is symbolized by the Mass. It's the broken body of Christ, her consort, teacher, whatever, which is then, through the church, united into a wholeness. But the trouble is the churches themselves are scattered and broken. As we've seen, each church has a different take on Mary Magdalene. They're all broken, they're all fighting against each other. So the question I pose for the second half is, how can we get a re-healing of those brokennesses? How can we piece together the many fragments of Mary Magdalene? And it's interesting that Christ, when he did the miracle at on the northern shores of Galilee, which I've been to, with the bread and the loaves, he scattered he somehow had this ability to, provide lunch out of nothing, thin air, a few fishes and a couple of loaves. And then at the end, if you recall, the text says, and then they gathered together all the pieces, put them into a basket, and it filled loads of baskets, like far more than the loaves even. And that was just the leftovers. Now that regathering of the fragments is what I'm talking about. It's it's a symbolic text, I think, for this process that happens. And that happens in the presence of miracles. The miraculous, to me, is the moment at which history and human experience become infused with the spiritual dimension of existence, which is our actual home. It's where we come from. So when a great teacher like Christ is able to do a little miracle as a teaching thing, John calls these signs. These are signs. They're not things in and of themselves, turning water into wine. No, it's not a party trick. It's a sign of God's intervention on the side of marriage, on the side of love and celebration and joy, in that case. And in the gathering up of the fragments, it's about how, from the very brokenness, we can actually have a fullness emerge. And out of tragedy comes a happy ending. Okay, so that's my and what I argue is that I think that Jesus and Mary Magdalene, whatever else they were doing, whatever else the context of their work, I'm pretty sure they were high initiates within the Hermetic tradition. The story of Isis and Osiris that I've just recounted would have been known to them, I believe, and they would have been enacting it in a sense. Discuss. And it's another question I've got, which is there an equivalent female mythological story to the dismemberment of Isis, the dismemberment of Osiris? Do we have a goddess that's dismembered in that way? I think it happens to Kali, if I'm right, and Shiva has to go and find the pieces. And one of them drops at Calcutta, which is why it's called Calicut or Kolkata. I've been to Calcutta, great place. But, I think I'm right in saying that. But it would be very interesting if some scholars of religious studies out there could please do a survey of all the broken Isis and broken Osiris stories, either male or female, because I think they're about this problem of being many and yet searching for unity. Okay, so I want to move on, and I'm going to run through some implications for today. Why does this story matter, and what are the implications? The first one I want to talk about is for mental health, mental illness. As I said in my first half, I think Mary Magdalene is the patron saint of therapy, psychotherapy, and millions of people on this planet feel broken or divided in their minds or loyalties. The very name schizophrenia, which is a tragic illness that affects many, many millions of people, means literally broken-minded, broken-hearted. And it means that you have many different facets to your personality, and you can't juggle them into harmony. They become conflictual, so that you become difficult to live with, and you become difficult to live with your many selves. I think because Mary Magdalene went through that and came out the other side, then this has implications for the way we treat mental illness. I have a colleague who set up the spiritual working group at the Royal College of Psychiatry in London, which is the body that all psychiatrists belong to. And most psychiatrists give pills, and they control things like voice hearing and symptoms of schizophrenia with suppressing the symptoms by just giving medication that knock the symptoms out. This chap tried a different route. He's Scottish. Maybe that gave him the independence of mind and spirit. And he decided, no, I'm going to take this stuff seriously. And he learned the arts of hypnotherapy, which after all Freud had learned, and it was one of the foundations of psychoanalytic technique. So he used very mild hypnotherapy on these patients who were advanced schizophrenics in mental hospitals in London. Drugged up for years, never cured, voice hearing, whatever. And he, in the hypnotherapeutic trance work, he talked to the patient, and the patient's voices became embodied. So he would ask the voice, who are you? As if it was like a possessing entity. Well, I'm the ghost of a 16-year-old boy, and I've been haunting this poor woman for 10 years and making her have voices because, And each of these voices had a story which would come out in the trance, which the conscious mind of the schizophrenic could never articulate. And they would say, they would explain why they're there, possessing this person. And then my friend the doctor, the psychiatrist, would ask them very politely, in a very British kind of way, to please leave this person alone. Could you please realise this is inappropriate behaviour? You shouldn't be occupying the mind of this poor person. They can't cope with it. Could you please just go to the light, please? There will be angelic beings can show you where to go. You shouldn't be lurking around this person. And amazingly, and then he said a blessing and a little prayer, and that was it, came out of the trance. And incredibly, this guy started getting healing results. He documented all this scientifically. He monitored it, and he recorded the things. And he was getting cures from these advanced schizophrenics that conventional psychiatry could not heal. He wrote up the papers, and he's a scientific psychiatrist in the Royal College of Psychiatry who actually found that this thing works. So I think this is very exciting. I think this should be done in every single mental hospital in the world. We should be exploring hypnotherapy. We should be exploring, the Mary Magdalene approach. I mean, to call it exorcism is too dramatic, because exorcism is the priest comes in all their robes, waves the holy water, says things in Latin, out damn spirit and so on. And you can get a real battle going on, and it's all great Hollywood, and it's good for movies like The Exorcist, but it's not, it needn't be like that. And the much more British way of doing it is to very gently ask the spirit to leave, and they do. 9 times out of 10, they're very polite. Because actually they themselves are lost, apparently. And I've heard this from other colleagues, other spiritual workers and mediums and so on. So I just put to people that maybe that's an avenue to explore if we're going to look at the implications of the Mary Magdalene story. And if it can help cure mental illness, which is a massive thing on the planet. I maintain, why is it such a massive thing, is because we're not treating it spiritually. Because we have a paradigm of human nature that says the mind is only the product of the chemical reactions of the brain, and therefore the only way to treat any disease of the mind is by changing the chemical structure of the brain by adding pills. That's the kind of mechanistic materialist paradigm of consciousness, which I think is outmoded. If we actually look into consciousness studies, which is a field I've written about, I'm very interested in, I think the evidence points to the fact that consciousness does exist outside the body, with near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. To me, there's a whole bunch of scientific proof for the what's called the non-locality of consciousness. It's not just restricted to the body, but we, during operations and so on, when people nearly die, they watch themselves from above. I have friends who've done, advanced scientific research on this that have proved that they actually were out of the body watching themselves, not just thinking about it or dreaming about it. Some people say it's just caused by hallucinations in the brain as it shuts down, but no, because they're hearing conversations that they couldn't hear because their ears are blocked and they're totally unconscious. They couldn't have heard discussions going on. So, and then they even did experiments with putting objects up high in the operating room, and that could only be seen from above, and the patients would come back and describe what they'd seen. So they thought of scientific proof tests for this. Now, if we start from that paradigm, as I do, that consciousness is not just restricted to the chemical processes that are going on in the brain. Yeah, that's very important, that's the vehicle. But it's not the creator of the consciousness. The consciousness or the soul descends into the body and uses the body as its vehicle for evolutionary life experiences during pregnancy, during the womb. And I've just written a book about the egg where I'm describing and exploring, to me the egg is the vehicle for that incarnation of that soul at some point. When, how, those are mysteries that I believe science and spirituality can work on together. But the important point here is that if you start from a paradigm that is meta-materialistic, so I love science, I love, I've worked in medicine, I've worked in hospitals, I've worked with every little conventional scientific explanation for the body, and it's great, but there's so much they don't know. And if we have this plus factor, the transpersonal, and we bring that into healing work with particularly mental illness patients. For instance, I would love to see every psychiatric ward in every hospital in the world to have like a meditation room, a little tiny chapel, where patients can go and just learn stillness and silence, inner peace. I'd love to see trained meditational teachers going in once a day from different denominations, chaplains from Christian, Muslim, Jewish, pagan, Druid, whatever, Hindu. Let's unlock the spiritual resources of all these wonderful traditions, including Christianity, for helping people now that are suffering. If you teach these people basic mindfulness, basic breathing techniques, meditation, it helps the cure. I think that's what Jesus was doing. I think that's what Mary Magdalene experienced. And my colleague Bruce Chilton, who came last year, he said that after Mary was healed, he speculates that she was put in charge of the exorcism team for the disciples because she'd been through it. So if a demoniac or someone that was possessed, came wandering into the ashram and said, I want to be healed, or his brother brought him in, then Jesus would say to Mary, look, you get it ready, sort it out, and then I'll come. So they worked as a team on what we would call psychotherapeutic healing and so on. So I think that's very important. And that's got one implication that I can see right now. If you said to me, what's the implication for the National Health Service in England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, I'd say put the spirit back into it. I lived in Peckham, where I taught for some time in schools on mediation, and it was in Peckham that the National Health Service was first trialled in southeast London, and it was about joined up healing in the whole community. It was looking at everything: diet, exercise, poverty, everything. The National Health Service was to provide healing for everybody, and I think the spiritual bit should also be in there. When I've worked in hospitals, I've always got on with the chaplains, made patients wheel them down just to have a little prayer experience. And when I worked in Canada for 4 years in hospitals, towards end of life care, patients become very agitated. They don't know what's happening with death, and they want someone to talk to. So they'd often talk to me as their counsellor. And if you can reassure them that, yes, there's probably somewhere they're going to go afterwards, and it's going to be all right. It's not going to be like a hell experience. That if God has brought us this far, given us this incredible planet to have these experiences in, then there's going to be some other place we go. And that's a faith experience that again, this helps with healing, even with physical illness. I've noticed patients with physical illness, if they have that spiritual faith dimension added, they tend to get better more quickly. It has a therapeutic impact. Anyway, so that's a huge area, the one of healing, mental healing, but also physical healing. And that in itself is enough. Another, and that's why so many Christians have worked in hospitals and founded medicine and been medical researchers, like Sir William Harvey, who discovered the circulation of the blood and the function of the heart, was a great Christian medical doctor and physician to King Charles I. These are great Christian doctors who can be inspired by the Mary Magdalene work to carry on, and like my Scottish psychiatrist friend. Okay, the next implication I want to talk about is huge, which is to do with what I call interfaith healing. And I talked about how Mary spans different faiths. We saw that she's broken into the Mary of Judaism, the Mary of all the different denominations of Christianity, the Catholic, the Cathar, the Gnostic, the Orthodox, the Arian, etc. There's the Mary of paganism, etc. Well, and the Mary who's revered in Freemasonry. So which is the real one? I want to turn that paradox onto its head, and I say that she's all of them, and therefore can help the healing between them. If enlightened Jewish feminist theologians who are exploring the Jewishness of Mary Magdalene come in dialogue with Christian feminist theologians who are talking, reclaiming the lost women disciples, and they study the Kabbalah together for peace, and they invite their Muslim brothers and sisters to come in and explore the feminine aspect of Islam, which is so important to Muhammad, and why he didn't know Mary Magdalene's name, and which of the Sufis have studied Mary Magdalene. There are some. They need to be reclaimed. And among the pagans, if the pagan theologians who are working on advanced pagan scholarship can look at ancient Egyptian, Canaanite, Phoenician, Babylonian, etc., and Greek pagan traditions, and see, well, Mary must have known some of that stuff, and then enter into dialogue with their Jewish, Islamic and Christian friends, then we can get a conversation going that will rapidly heal these interfaith conflicts. I mean, my vision is quite radical, actually, if you've read my other contexts on my Peace Institute. What I'm aiming to do is get the Golden Gate reopened in the East Wall of Jerusalem, which by tradition can only be done when the Messiah comes back. And Islam, Judaism, Christianity all agree this Golden Gate will be opened and the Messiah will come back, it'll be the last judgment, and some will live, some will die. I'm saying we have the freedom to change that narrative. I'm saying that as a concession by humanism to religiosity, let's take the narrative seriously, but as a concession from religiosity to humanism, let's adapt that narrative so it works for humanity. Because at the moment that narrative isn't working. The gate is shut and the religions are all killing each other. We're doing the broken Mary story. I'm saying open the gate collectively. Let the religious leaders of the planet pledge to reopen it, symbolically have a ceremony of peace, found a space on the Temple Mount which is non-denominational, trans-denominational. It would be open to every faith and none. That would be peace pilgrims who've committed to non-violence. And I think that this is something that the Mary Magdalene tradition would that's what, I think she would be very delighted at that. And I'm sure she'll turn up incognito as some young Palestinian woman just coming up to have a cup of mint tea in the peace tent on the Dome of the Rock. That'd be a lot better than the fighting that's going on. So, yes, I think Mary Magdalene can be a symbol for that opening of the Golden Gate and for the interfaith healing that it could produce. and generally getting this dialogue between these different religious groups going at the highest level for peace, about the role of spirituality in our lives and in discussion. Because as Socrates said, it comes from dialectic, it comes from discussion. There's no absolute right and wrong answers. There's a lot of explorations needed to be done. Just as there was in the time of Christ and the ashram. One of the things that comes out of the gospel records is he was always asking, he would play the game, who do you think I am game. That's what I call it. He'd ask the disciples in turn, so who do you think I am today? And he'd go round the group and one would say, well, you're a wise philosopher. You're the king, you're the Messiah, etc. They'd go round. And it's in the Gospels. They used to play that game a lot. And in the Gospel of Thomas, it's reported that when it came to Thomas's turn, he answered, I can't say what I think you are. And Jesus said, bingo, you've got the right answer. Because you've drunk from the same bubbling cup I've drunk from. And I think that's what Mary would have answered too. And I think we can play the who do you think I am game with Mary as well. That's kind of what I'm playing here today. And that, we can ask the same question of Buddha. Who do you think Buddha was? Was he, fully enlightened, fully omniscient? Did he know everything? Could he see into the future? Did he know I was going to be talking here and now today about this? If it depends how you interpret omniscience. If you interpret Buddha's omniscience as quantitative, then he would have to know everything that's ever happened in the entire universe, or ever will. Like every single leaf that drops in every single tree in the Amazon jungle all the time. Now, I don't buy that version of omniscience. What's the point? How could you have a brain big enough, and why would you want to store all that data? It'd be like a super duper computer. Now, I think there's such a thing as what I call qualitative omniscience, not quantitative. We've gone down the quantitative route as a planet to our peril, as René Guénon said. We need to go for qualitative omniscience, which is knowing the value of things, knowing the quality. He might know when a big tree was about to fall down that was going to kill someone. He might pick up on that and make steps to prevent it. That's qualitative omniscience. So that's the who's the Buddha game. Then we can play who's the Muhammad game. Was he was obviously a prophet, some kind of prophet, but where was his qualifications? Where was his educational background? Did he go to Heteira and meet with Manichaeans? Why is the Quran full of Manichaean theology? Did the Manichaeans know anything about Mary Magdalene? Apparently not. Same problem. Discuss who was Muhammad. That's a really interesting game. And the thing is that he's all of those things. And then we can play the who was Mahavira, the who was Merlin. They're all implicit in this who was Mary Magdalene. And I think that ultimately out of these questions comes interfaith healing, which is what I want to deliver. That's my job as a scholar. I'm a specialist in interfaith peace and reconciliation. And that's why I'm interested in Mary Magdalene, because she is a key to that interfaith healing. Okay, so moving on, another implication is international healing. Now, this is vital. I've spoken at the UN headquarters in New York. I've been there several times. I love the UN. I have the flag of the UN in this room. But it's not working. It's not managing to prevent all the wars. There's civil wars going on in Yemen. What's the UN doing about it? It doesn't seem to have enough imagination. I don't know what it is. There's America and Iran ratcheting up, anger speech. There's Britain, like a sort of, attack dog for the US, attacking Iran as Israel. Netanyahu grumbling at Iran, etc., etc. And where's the UN? Where's the UN Secretary General standing up and saying, enough, stop this? It's against the UN Charter. All this is against the UN Charter. You're not allowed to threaten other nations, let alone invade them or bomb them. So, why can Mary Magdalene help with that? Well, she was an international person, you see. Where would she feel at home now? She's kind of mixed, isn't she? She's partly in the Hellenistic world, so I could see her happily, wandering around a Greek island. She'd fit in fine. She's very Palestinian. She'd be happy in Palestine among the people of the West Bank and Gaza. There are many Christian churches in Gaza which honour and respect Mary Magdalene. There's many Palestinian Christians to this day. Arabic is their main language, but their scriptures are often in Syriac. They come back from a Syriac tradition, which was the original language of Aramaic, which was the language Mary Magdalene and Jesus would share, in private moments. So those Palestinian Christians are probably the closest descendants left on the planet to the original Sangha of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. So they would want, she would want them to be honoured, given their own, country, their own passports, their own state, to be part of the diplomatic world like everyone else. But she's also Jewish. She would be happy to. She would say, she'd stand up in the Knesset and say, I'm as Jewish as any of you. Let's talk peace policy, people, because Israel is not living up to our heritage. Israel is supposed to be faithful to the one, but instead, we're breaking up, and causing chaos and doing dark arts of war and all the rest of it. So let's live up to our heritage as peace people. And then I think Mary Magdalene would be very happy in Europe, because she's often thought to have come here to France, to Gaul, and she was obviously, a well-travelled international woman. And I think that we should not forget that the court of Herod Antipas that she had links to was, international. It was someone who studied in Rome, ended up living in Hispania. These were international people. So I think Mary Magdalene would say, look, you've got to heal these conflicts between these nations. In the Iranian tradition of Shi'ism, I think there are traditions to do with Mary Magdalene in some of the Sufi, Shia and Ismaili sects. In the Ismaili tradition, which is a very interesting one, they believe in reincarnation of different prophets come back time and time again. So Muhammad and Ali, like a dyad, they've reincarnated before, they're saying two, and they reincarnate in cycles of, they've tried to work out the years, like every 700 years or something. And the Ishmaelis probably say that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were like a dyad that then reincarnate at different times. And the job of the philosopher historian is to track the incarnational moments of arrival. So there's some dialogue with the Iranians. Instead of bombing and making war, the Iranians sit on a lot of esoteric secrets in their academies and schools and colleges, which the West, people like Henry Corbin, French philosopher, Louis Massignon, we love the Iranian philosophers because they're very, very deep. So rather than war, we should have struggles for knowledge. Okay, there's another implication for peace research. As I said in my earlier remarks, that the chaos that was going on in Palestine and Israel at the time of Mary Magdalene's life, she was part of this small group trying to stop the wars breaking out, saying to the Romans, the Jews, the Greeks, the Syrians, everybody, let's make peace, not war. And unfortunately, the main people didn't listen till it was too late. And some people listened, but not enough. And in 70 AD, an enormous war broke out between the Roman imperial forces and the Jewish rebels, talked about by Josephus in the Jewish War. And it was the most horrendous war that had happened, really, up to that point in history, I think. About 1 million people died. Jerusalem was besieged by the Romans, and they crucified thousands of people outside the city walls every day to force the Jews to surrender. They crucified them in front of the city walls.